Fearless.
Provocative. Straight talking. We will say it like it really is.
With dignity and respect.
Committed to free speech and common sense.
Upbeat and entertaining.
Straight talking and direct.
We may agitate each other and you.
Heartfelt and passionate.
Thought-provoking, provocative and controversial.
Fearless and truthful. Welcome to The Pledge, the programme committed to straight talking and fearless debate. In this show, Graham sees the funny side of a very British obsession. Michelle wants to debate the pros and cons of having sex on television. James has got a personal message for his LinkedIn followers, all 2.5 million of them. And Nick is angry about the treatment of Sir Cliff. But first, it's my turn. And I want to talk about a very difficult subject that we're now being forced to confront. The killing of Jo Cox has rocked the UK to its core. This type of thing just doesn't happen in Britain, many of my friends have remarked, still in shock a week on since the Labour MP was gunned down outside her local library. And yet it has. So now what? Beyond the beautiful remembrance services and emotional tributes of Jo Cox's heartbroken family and friends, where does this senseless act of barbarism leave British MPs? While I would love to subscribe to the optimistic view that nothing should change in the wake of this tragedy, I can't. British MPs need more protection at surgeries in their local constituencies and, on occasion, while out and about. Politicians from other countries are often surprised at the lack of security surrounding our elected officials, but more could be and should be done to ensure their safety. In the wake of Jo Cox's killing, MPs of both genders have spoken out about their fears and repeated requests for more security. It's time to heed their rising voices and do what we can to care for those on the front line of democracy.
Emma, whilst I clearly agree that was a tragedy, but the only thing that gets in my head is how do we do that? So if you take Tony Blair, you know, the security just surrounding Tony Blair costs about £1 million a year. The 650 MPs that we allegedly should be protecting, I mean, that's a lot of money. So...
But it's not going to be the same as Tony Blair's protection. We know what Tony Blair's protection is. It's the highest level it can be. He was the leader of this country, and I have no issue with protecting him. Whether he has to do all the trips he does and going to all the conferences he does is another debate, which is why it gets in people's hair about where he goes and what we need to do for him. He's now, you know, a Middle East envoy. That's what he's been. It's a very dangerous part of the world anyway. What I'm talking about is MPs, as I say, of both genders this week have come out and said, I have gone to the police and said I've had repeated threats, whether that's online or in person, and I have to wait until it gets to a certain point until I get more protection. So I'm not talking about the Tony Blair level. I think that's a very moot point to take it to that end. I'm talking about panic buttons. You know, Nicky Morgan, she's talked about wanting to put a panic button. She's the Education Secretary, the Women's Minister, in her office. They're talked about ramping up security.
You know, they can do that.
Yeah, but it's not been done.
But
it's
my
not
point
been
is
done.
that the government have made that facility available.
But it's not a priority. Since the stabbing of another Labour MP, Stephen Timms, you know, which was sort of 4 or 5 years ago, we haven't ramped up the security efficiently in this country.
But MPs have an opportunity where the government have provided that. So you can get CCTV, you can get panic buttons, you can apply for all of the things you're saying.
But why can't you get a local police officer in your office?
All I'm saying,
okay.
but hang on, let me just finish. So what I'm saying is, so the whole concept of being a local MP is having access to your local MP.
That won't stop.
But, you know, to have security
When
surrounding...
did you last go into a constituency visit? Have you ever visited your local MP? Tell me the truth, James Carn. No, you haven't actually ever visited one. Let me tell you, if you go into your local constituency office, which I have done, and if there was a policeman there, I don't care if he has to frisk me. It will not stop me from going in if I have an issue.
I don't think I'd
the problem is, I think obviously you've got the financial problem of you know, a close protection individual from a security company is £30 an hour. So with 650 MPs, you're talking about, you know, upwards of something like 800 million a year for all MPs. So there is a financial...
Good maths,
thank you very much. There is a financial sort of...
I'm not talking to that level.
Exactly. But I think, apart from that, there is actually the fact that there are also a lot of MPs that don't want to feel that people are going to come in and be frisked. And there's also a vocal group of them that are saying that aren't taking up the options of some of the security because they want to be contactable. So it is a very fine line. The point I think that you make, which is absolutely vital in this, is how serious people take the police, etc., take reports by MPs when they're concerned for their own safety. And I think that is the mechanism that should red flag issues around MPs when they feel vulnerable or feel like they're at risk.
Let me bring in Nick, who was huffing and puffing there.
Making laws or predictions or suggestions so soon after such a tragedy is always the wrong time to do it. You have to allow dust to settle, I think, because you make very bad laws at a time like this. I'm confused with your suggestion, which is not a new emotion for me, dealing with you, Emma. At one moment you talk about panic buttons. I know you love me, really,
Yeah,
Nick. At 1 minute about panic buttons. Yeah, if you want to put panic buttons, and James has pointed out, fine. Next, you're suggesting that there should be a police officer outside every surgery. Dear God, there aren't enough police officers to look after the people who are out there. There aren't enough police officers to go around and chase the bad guys and the bad women as there is. The idea where you are cash-strapped with coppers, you're going to have one standing outside a surgery twice a week, or whenever it might be that the MP, is sheer lunacy.
Well, usually it's once a week, and usually it's only for a few hours. And they are usually happening in central locations, pretty near a police station.
No. But it's not
I don't think there's an issue.
No, it's not just about money on the police side of things, because I just think the last time that an MP was seriously assaulted, as you said, was, 2010, I think?
2010, yeah.
So I think that whilst what happened with Jo Cox is undeniably, it's awful, but it is incredibly rare. And I think I did something very recently with Nigel Farage, and we was in a room, and in the corner of the room there was 2 bodyguards that Nigel had to bring with him.
I do want to ask, what did you do with Nigel Farage? The way you said, I did something with Nigel.
It's on pay-per-view. You can't go into too much detail.
I've got to be honest, it was question time. It wasn't anything, it wasn't anything fruity or anything. But and I just looked at that and I thought, what a sad state of affairs that there's somebody who has to have around-the-clock personal security with him, because where we need to get to in the world is that we need to be able to respect different opinions, and we need to be able to disagree like we do on this show and actually fundamentally get along and be respecting of different opinions. To me, the answer is not, let's just arm all of these people or let's just protect all of these people against all these nutters. It's about how do we create a more tolerant society.
I mean, that's all very well and good, but can I just point something else out? Is one of the big problems in this country is who wants to be an MP. Right? Very few people I
wouldn't do
know.
It for all the love in the
Would
world.
anybody around this table become an MP?
Yeah, fantastic.
All right, this is his campaign. This is why he's doing
supervision is absolutely superb.
This is why he's doing the pledge.
Yeah. I'm available.
Life after the media.
Yeah.
But put that aside for one moment.
I'd love it.
Most people do not wish to be an MP. And I've got to say, it's not a gender issue at all. Most men and women, seeing what goes on with the abuse in the media, with the way that every single thing you said can never be taken seriously unless you have a robust debate in a way that doesn't even sort of seem real to the way normal people talk. But then on top of that, there is now what people feel a threat. I know what happened with Jo Cox is just... I'm still so upset about it because I don't know what it is, but it just doesn't happen in Britain. And I know that's what you're saying, that this isn't a normal thing.
But they won't be able to do their job,
happened.
Emma. I bet if you were to ask them, the majority would say we don't want police protection because how can they get in and among the community? Remember, we elect them and we pay them to represent us.
But it's also not just MPs, though, as well, is it? If you think about people that are...
people in public
life. Like you've got...
Where do you draw the line?
Do you remember Raoul Mertz? And he went off and he was deliberately seeking police to try and kill. So I think you've got... prison officers regularly assaulted, you've got teachers, you've got police, you've got MPs. So where do you stop? Do we start saying that all public servants get protection?
Yeah, but MPs are up there for their views, and that's what's being discussed.
Well, so are radio presenters.
Nick.
So there we go. Well, where does that end?
No, but in all seriousness, people don't come to you with their issues to solve and take to Westminster. I mean, you may feel they do,
I know.
But there is a difference, and I do think we have to be aware of what is the job brief for one of the most important jobs, which is representing all of us.
But I don't want to go in there and see a policeman standing there. I'm just saying. I know, but I would feel uncomfortable. Even if I was there, Emma, OK, you've made your point, but even if I was there...
You would feel uncomfortable.
I would feel uncomfortable. I agree, should they have CCTV? Yes.
Yeah.
Should they have a panic
But
button?
ultimately,
yes.
James, with that, even with that would not have made a difference in the tragic events of last week, because ultimately, unless you've got somebody there who's armed in that situation, they would not have been able to stop what happened. So ultimately, I think it goes back to the point that you have to have... You just have to have a better monitoring tool so that if MPs are feeling threatened, that the police can pick up a pattern of behaviour that they can then intervene with.
It's not
brilliant.
And that even includes...
That's the best performance from an England player I've seen all week. Absolutely. 1-0 to Graham.
No offence,
There's
Graham,
no point.
That wouldn't have been hard, if I may make that remark.
Unless he's going to have a squad of Marines with these people, it's never going to... Graham wins. Well done.
All I was going
Case
to
closed.
say is, on a serious note, if there was a regular communication line between the police and MPs that MPs themselves felt very comfortable about, that they could say, you know, there may have been a situation where you would know about certain people in the community that made you feel uncomfortable.
Can I just give one closing comment on that?
Hang on a moment. People don't feel, who are elected officials, that they have that line into the police. And when members of the government and members who we've elected don't feel like that, how do you think the rest of us feel? I think there's an issue.
I just, on Graham's point, so when you were saying about that, if you take the most powerful nation in the world, with all the security in the world, you know, Abraham Lincoln, James Garfield, William McKinley and John F. Kennedy were all assassinated while being present with all the security around them. So I think the point...
They don't have the level of security that we do now. That's why, Obama's assassination attempt in 2011 was flouted.
Well, this is going to... I think this is a conversation that's going to run and run and run, and it's important that we take a long-term view, I think, Nick, on what's best way to protect our MPs. Well, we're obsessed with owning our own homes in this country. It's part of our national psyche. It's even part of our comedy. Whether it's Tom and Barbara's suburban self-sufficiency in The Good Life, Dale's dream of becoming a millionaire so they could buy a big house like Boise, or even Hyacinth Bouquet peering over the garden fence. But I think this obsession is making the housing crisis worse and blinding us to an affordable alternative. In cities like Paris, Berlin and New York, they would never dream of taking out mortgages that put them hundreds of thousands of pounds in debt. In France, the law doesn't actually allow it anyway. But unlike Paris, where rents are controlled, we have the worst of both worlds. Many people now can't afford to buy or rent. They're trapped between rising house prices and the cost of a deposit on one side and the extortionate rents and short-term tenancy agreements on the other. If we want to sort out the housing crisis, we need to get over this obsession with owning our own homes. But we'll only be able to do this if we make renting cheaper and fairer.
I've got to say, I am guilty as charged. I was one of those people that was absolutely obsessed with owning my first home. And I used to do so many little jobs so that I could buy my first property, which I managed to do at the age of 21. It was only this little tiny place. It was miles away from the rest of my family, but I adored it. I still have it. It's worth about 20 pence, don't get me wrong. It's in the wrong end of Hull. But it was something that, to me...
Is there a writer?
Nick Ferrari.
That was a joke, everyone in Hull. That was a joke. Sorry, John Prescott.
But it was something that gave me a sense of security and pride, and I felt that I'd worked hard and achieved. And now I am, you know, I've been very recently looking at rented properties, and I am blown away by how appalling the rental market is. And I think this is quite different across the country, because I think what goes on in London versus the rest of the country is slightly different. But in London, for example, you have people that are shoved into houses, renting rooms, and they are paying like over £1,000 for a room in a house. And when you see the standards of these properties, the landlords couldn't care less. They don't look after the property. They don't refurb the property. So I think, and I speak as a landlord myself, I'm a landlord and a property owner, and I think what we've got is we're in a situation where you've got so many people want to own the homes for private reasons, for investment reasons, but until we get rents under control and until we get landlords taking their responsibility as landlords seriously and actually caring for their property, I don't know how we're going to solve this, and I think we are a massive way off from both of those things.
Nick, do you think it's an industry that we should support?
What are you working for?
What am I working for?
At the end of decades for all of us, all the work we put in, decades, sometimes working in jobs we don't like, for bosses we loathe or despise, what are we doing? So when you reach a certain point, hopefully, if you've been able to put a few quid together, you can hopefully have a decent home so that your grandchildren come and see there, they can play in the back garden, or they can come to the centre of London, or they can go to the better parts of Hull, they can go to wherever they want to go, because that's what you have achieved. I hear what you say. It grieves me that it's so difficult, particularly in London, where both my sons live and have got on the property ladder. Credit to them, they're grafting away so they can get on the property ladder. It grieves me that there is such a paucity of housing across the whole of the country. The solution, I would argue, is not to redo the system. The solution, or the prospect, has to be that when you have worked your nuts off, you have a decent place, and I don't see how that will ever change.
Yeah, but ultimately, we've created an industry out of the property market, whether it is buying and making money, or renting and making money to then pay off the debt that you've taken as a landlord. So what we've done is we've created a sort of an environment of where people are trapped. So aspirational, wanting to buy your own property. I was the same when I first came over to England. I wanted to, and started my football career. I thought, if I can come out of my football career with whatever it is, without a mortgage, I've done really well. And
that's quite possible in football.
Yeah, but because my earnings were sort of were loaded to a young age, so I was able to do that.
But Graham, don't you think that is the one thing that we all aspire? It's the one thing we do that creates capital wealth. We spend our whole life earning money, but the one asset we end up owning that creates real worth to us, that maybe we can retire, is our homes. I think if we stop doing what Margaret Thatcher started, I think it's a tragedy. Now, let me put it, 64% of people in this country own their own property, which is the biggest asset they will own. So I think it's a great thing to do. I think, yes, I accept there's a problem, but it comes down to supply and demand. You know, demand is high, supply is short, and therefore prices will be high. But if you take the average, if you take it across the country, rents are £625 a month. So I think London is where the critical problem is. But outside of London, I don't think it's as bad as you're making out.
You have pockets up and down the country that are desirable, so you're going to have a disproportionate expense depending on where you live within the country. But of course, supply and demand, I'm not denying that. And I'm not denying the fact that wanting to own a property and aspiring to do that, is that there's anything wrong with that. There isn't. But the fact is, we've gone from having that relatively simple aspiration and value to actually people looking at properties purely as an investment, purely as a way to make money, and unless the rise in the cost of buying property is proportionate to what people are earning, then you create this massive
But the maths don't work, Graham, because the rent is correlated to the purchase price of the property. So if the property is going to cost you £500,000 in London, you can't rent it cheap. You've got to cover your... You know, you pay a £100,000 deposit, plus you have to service the loan that you've taken out to purchase the property. How... You know, the two numbers won't add up doing what you're saying.
Yeah, but they also won't add up if you're paying that much of your earnings in rent. You'll never be able to save enough to put down a deposit to then buy a property. But what can the landlord do? If that is the price of the property, there's nothing he can do. Well, what you have to do is introduce...
You have to... So I only recently got out of the rental market and managed to buy my first home. I lived above a chicken shop in Ladbroke Grove in London, which, believe me, we had a lot of fun parties in, me and my best friend, when we were starting out in journalism. And the rent was through the roof versus what I know on Zoopla that property cost. They are making a huge profit on it. It wasn't looked after very well. And we just dealt with it because we were coming to London.
What's the matter with you people?
No,
people make profits.
No,
that's what drives business.
Why did you pay the rent, then?
I'm questioning James's maths.
Emma, why did you pay the rent? But you paid the rent because that...
Honestly...
Because that was what?
It was proximity to work and it was where I could live.
That was the price. But if you didn't take it, somebody else would.
Yeah, but to that point, to Emma's point, is that now you've got 1 in 4 people between the age of 20 and 34 still living at home. So Emma's point is absolutely right, where people are trapped with a huge cost that they might just about be able to afford. You had to live somewhere, didn't you?
Can I actually just say one more thing? We got evicted from the second flat, not our fault, long story, and we had to move back to my then boyfriend, now husband's family home. And that was the first time in my life at the age of 27, yes, got a bit strained living with the future in-laws, but I could save. First time in my life I could save because I wasn't being charged for 9 months. It was the rarest window. And that allowed us to start having a buffer for a deposit. If you don't get these little moments of reprieve, and I'm from Manchester, don't think I don't look back at where I come from and think, God, I could, for £600,000, have the most incredible house versus what I could have in London. I know the differences. And we should also make the point, just very briefly on the idea of it being an industry, that outside of London, lots of people's properties have gone down in value. It is a bubble in London. I mean, lots of people have bought in sort of odd little places to try and get on the ladder, and it's not been a good thing. But I think for my generation, we feel very light. We still have to get on that ladder. We will take on huge amounts of debt. We will take on the risk. And it's because of the aspiration Nick talked about. We want somewhere to lay our heads safely at the end of the day. Because, Graham, listen, this is what you can't go back to. You can't go back to rent controls. It just won't work. Because if you look at New York,
it's true.
And I read this paper that was quite dry, but if you look at what happened there in New York, the quality of the properties went down under rent controls. We can't turn the clock back on that. We're a capitalist society, whether you want it to be or not. So the issue's about building more homes for me. And actually, if you look at the sort of get on the ladder scheme, you know, the government have helped to buy, that's the one. it's actually not working out that well for a lot of people because of the amount of debt they're having to take on and the property that they're able to get.
But supply and demand is an obvious answer, and building more properties is an obvious answer. But unless we move away from the fact that we see it is degrading if you don't own your own, or you haven't really achieved until you own your own property.
You can't live anywhere for long enough.
No, but you have to create a rental protection for the tenants, which they do in lots of places. In France, they do it. Germany, Holland, Sweden, they do it, where the tenant has the rights. You have people living in their rented accommodation for 20, 30 years because they've got control of the tenancy agreement as opposed to the landlord. And the point is, it goes back to what I'm saying, we've created an industry where people are making money out of it rather than creating an environment where people feel secure with the roof over their head, whether it's rented or owned.
Graham, stop dreaming.
And on that note, I never thought I would hear myself saying this, but I have spent a fair part of my time this week discussing Miss Great Britain. The most recent winner, Zara Holland, who, like me, comes from Hull, where the properties are cheap, won the crown in 2015 and promptly signed up to the reality TV show Love Island. While on the island of love, Zara got slightly too close to a fellow love-seeker and they ended up having sex. But thankfully, this is all they showed.
OMG!
Wow.
That's what happens when Nick goes to bed as well.
I've seen some things in my time, but yeah, that's interesting. Anyway, Miss Great Britain promptly removed her title, and frankly, I've been amazed at the outcry. So many people are accusing them of slut-shaming, and tens of thousands of people have now signed a petition demanding Zara's crown is reinstated. But here's the thing. If you compete in something and win what is essentially a brand sponsorship, you have to be willing to abide by the sponsor's values. And if you don't, then the brand should always reserve the right to drop you like the hottest of potatoes.
I feel like I've landed on a different planet.
OMGBJ.
That's the first clip of this ghastly show that I've ever seen.
I don't watch it either.
It's the last clip I want to see.
Oh, get your peg off your nose.
If that's what you want to watch, that's absolutely fine. But, I mean, I'll just say this. This was once the nation of Dickens and Shakespeare and Chaucer. This sort of trash, this sort of cobblers just coarsens the nation. I mourn television, if that's the way it's going.
What's your point,
think it is appalling. I don't care about this girl. I don't care whether she's going to be Miss Great Britain, whether she's not going to be Miss Great Britain, whether she's going to be picked to team up with Jamie Vardy next week. I don't care. I couldn't care about her life. I couldn't care about the reality TV shows. They drive me bloody crackers. They're a heap of crap and I loathe them.
I think you should say what you really think.
Listen, I
Honestly.
can't wait for you to miss one of your mortgage payments and have to go on one to pay it off.
All right, you've got me. I have done one. I have done one.
Yes, you
So,
can.
the people who gave her the crown,
Yes.
did they know she was going on the show?
No.
Yes.
They did. They did know.
Yes, not when they get... Right, so
hang
she
on,
went onto the show as Miss Great Britain.
OK,
so
but what
had
I'm
the
saying
crown.
is... listen, I'm not going to judge whether she did right or... I'm just saying the people who have taken her title away knew, they consented to her to go onto the show.
Yes.
So I'm just saying it's a bit of hypocrisy that you give her the crown, you let her go on the show, and then you say, oh, my God...
What happens on Love Island?
You know, so, I mean, what I'm saying is I think it's wrong. At the same time, you know, she's 20, she's single, you know, and she's had sex, so...
Can I actually just read her quote about this? She says, all women have needs. There's nothing wrong with having sex on TV. And as Jane says, she's 20. I'm more worried about that, actually.
I was just about to say.
That's a norm in a 20-year-old's mind, that if you have needs, satisfy them on national television.
Yeah.
And that is to Nick's point. But But just zooming away from that, I tried to enter this morning in research, Miss Great Britain. I
Yeah,
went on the form.
in research.
Yeah, went on the form. First thing you asked, waist size, breast size, all of your vital statistics. And then at the end, you've got 255 characters, not words, to tell them your achievements, talent, ambition, and why you should be Miss GB. Here's the point. It was created in 1945, this competition, for people who weren't going to the seaside to cheer everyone up after the war. It's an anachronism, OK? And here's my issue.
Well, if girls want to do it, what's the problem?
No, here's my issue. That's fine, I don't really care,
okay.
but here's my issue. Come on, you can't say for Miss Great Britain you were expecting her to be this role model. Let's say, if it was the UN ambassador of goodwill, if it was Angelina Jolie...
She showed a lot of goodwill there.
If it was a UN ambassador who went on Celebrity Love Island all of a sudden, or Love Island, and then you reacted to what you'd seen with OMG
Bloody
BJ.
Angela Merkel again.
If Angela Merkel or Angelina Jolie, I was about to say Angelina, though, Angela Merkel, then you'd have a different thing. But Miss Great Britain is all about your bust size.
So you're saying it's superficial?
I'm
and
just
I think
saying,
we should
I'm not judging it,
Should
but
the world not be relieved of Miss Great Britain? Should we not strip
I think it's
Miss
about
Great
time.
Britain and Miss World, in fact, from
Well,
what would have
tried to dress
because it's
them up.
so superficial.
If that was a guy who'd done the same thing,
Good point.
would we be saying the same thing?
No, but my point
I would
is
hope
not.
so.
My point is
don't
not.
think
So number one, I think anyone that goes on national television and has sex has got something missing. I think it's such a bizarre thing. I just would never be able to do it. But my point is, if you're involved in this beauty pageant world, which I would never be interested in doing so, but the rules and the stipulations and what you have to conform to is so strict. And this girl was involved by choice in that world for a very long time, so she knew what was expected of her. And I think that when you do an endorsement and a tie-in with a business, you're advocating that business. It doesn't matter what the business is.
It's the business of boobs.
Yes, but it still has
And
restrictions
sex.
on you. No, not on
It is.
sex.
Well, not- it's the business of sexual appeal.
Yes, but it's not the business of... They have criteria.
It's sexual appeal.
They have criteria, and if their criteria is you cannot do this, and you knowingly go and do it, you then cannot cry when you have the effects and the ramifications of that.
But what James was saying was that it is a bit hypocritical of the organisers in the sense they gave consent for it to go on it, and it's called Love Island, and there's probably been a few series, so there's every chance that something might lead to something else. And as long as she wasn't wearing the sash and the crown during the performance, maybe that was in the contract.
Bits below the belt.
Can I also
but I mean, the whole
venture-
thing's I just think it's a joke.
The bigger issue for me is not Miss Great Britain or whether she should have signed this contract or not, is that actually, and it's not, and I have no issue that, as she says, women have needs. I have no issue that a role model of mine, although Miss Great Britain I don't think is that many people's role model, but a role model, let's say, of mine has sex. I really don't care. Women can enjoy it. I think as a society we still don't quite accept that women can enjoy sex in the way that men
Absolutely.
do. Yeah, there we go. But
Nonsense.
the bigger issue is actually that a 20-year-old, who I'm sure is a lovely girl from everything that we've seen,
She's from Hull. All girls from Hull. Yeah.
thinks it is normal to go on television and
Yeah,
have
that
sex.
is
That is the
I
society
don't think
we've
she's
created.
Emma, she's not saying that. Look, you know, it was a
Sorry,
moment of
hang on.
passion. It was a moment
There
of
is
passion.
nothing wrong
No,
with
she's
having
not.
sex on TV. If one of your daughters said to you, "Hi, Dad, I'm 20, quote, all women have got needs, yeah? I'm just going to go on TV and have sex," would you be thrilled?
No.
Right.
Exactly.
So that's the point. It's not normal that, as Nick was saying about television now, the nation of Dickens is now the nation of other types.
Dickens.
I mean, if we could spare a thought for her though as well, because she's missed out on being stripped of her title. She's been missed out on going on to represent Great Britain in the Miss Tourism World Championships. I mean,
Absolutely.
God, no.
But I can't stress it enough.
Stop
It's like, for me,
That's
it's like
serious.
when Tiger Woods did all of his shenanigans and he lost his brand endorsements.
Yeah.
I think that was absolutely right. I can't stress enough, if you're a person that ties yourself to a brand, you must adhere to those values of the brand. And if you don't like it, Emma, well, I'm sorry, don't get involved with that brand. Don't put yourself on that
I would argue
platform.
the brand of Miss Great Britain is purely based on how fit you are.
Yeah, I agree. But then they have...
That's why she's on Love Island.
Yes, but they have brand restrictions. It doesn't matter. It's like...
She's capitalising on how fit she is.
Yes, but what? By giving... I nearly said something really rude then. By
giving him what he wants.
By having sex on national television. I'm sorry, she's
part
breached
and
the
parcel of
contract.
Love Island. James makes the point very rightly. They knew what she was off to do. They know what goes on Love Island. If a bloke was doing it, it wouldn't have this furore.
No,
But guess what? A bloke wouldn't be entering into a bikini competition.
She breached the contract of the terms and conditions of that endorsement. If you don't like the terms and conditions of that
I think we are
endorsement,
slut-shaming her, but I'm more concerned that she wants to go... I think we are slut-shaming her.
This new word that's...
It's a phrase, James.
Yeah.
Daughters will tell you about it. But the point is, I'm more concerned that a 20-year-old thinks to get on in life in Britain, you need to go on television
I agree.
and live
That's terrible.
That
is terrible.
And I feel even worse that we're talking about this now and also live about her online, on the internet, forever. So when she goes for her first job...
Well, and for Nick's benefit, they have got a DVD box set that you can
That's something I don't want for Christmas.
OK, well, I'm in the chair after the break, and I'm going to explain why I think Zuckerberg and co are in danger of getting too big for their boots. Microsoft's deal to buy the networking site LinkedIn means more of our information is owned by an ever smaller group of tech giants. In a world where information is power, that makes me a little bit uneasy. As deals go, it was a big one, just over £18 billion. And Microsoft's not alone in its quest to gobble up smaller companies. Google bought YouTube in 2006 and has now bought 170 companies since 1998. 2 years ago, Apple bought Beats for nearly £2 billion at the end of a buying spree where it bought 24 different companies. And Facebook snapped up Instagram in 2012 and last year bought WhatsApp, meaning it acquired 40 companies since 2004. Every email, every social media post, every WhatsApp message that you send, the data belongs to the same people. Now, we accept that consumers lose out in the UK banking market because it's dominated by 5 major players. So why is there no uproar that a handful of all-seeing, all-knowing superpowers run the online world?
Well, there's no uproar other than on those platforms, because that's where everybody has their microphone now. But the thing I would say is, first of all, a lot of the acquisitions make sense for those businesses. So it's not just about buying the data. Microsoft wants to be everywhere associated with work. It's repositioning its brand. Facebook is the photo company until Instagram came along, so it bought Instagram, so it could be there with you with all of your images and not lose it. Interestingly, most people don't know that Facebook owns Instagram. They're still branded very separately. So I think what you've done is a good public service, highlighting who owns what. Lots of people still don't realise Google owns YouTube, even though it's been the case for many, many years. The thing that I would say is what it really highlights is how out of date our regulators are. Because if you think about how things are regulated, that the Ofcom, for instance, the media regulator, understands how a television company works and how a radio station works, but it doesn't apply any of the same rules to the internet, any of those forums. So today, you know, things that we can't talk about today, everyone can talk about on the internet if they have an internet company. And the reason I say this is because if you think about all those companies, they're American. Right? The majority of them. OK, Skype was originally European. But all of them have gone into American hands. We have no control in this country, regulatory-wise, over those bodies.
I know, but that was exactly the point I was making. What I like is in England we have something called the Monopolies Commission, which basically regulates that no one organisation should overly dominate and or control. So if you take Google, 97% of all the searches done in the world, it belongs to one company. So my point is there now time, really taking your point, to take the concept of the Monopolies Commission to a global level?
No one will. They just won't do it. I mean, I think the issue with your arguments is not actually what you're saying, because most people would say, hey, if I did know all of my data was going through all of these companies... The thing is, nobody cares.
But it's voluntary, isn't it?
And it is.
You sign up to. You're not mandated to sign up to
these.
So if you don't want to get into that world, you don't need to. Spell out what your fears are, then. You think there could be some dark, sinister, evil power with all these...
I mean, I suppose what I'm saying is, when you have... I kind of fear that any one organisation that dominates a particular field, I think is unhealthy. So where you have a Google that, you know, when we do one simple search for one item, Graham was telling me, over 100 bits of information is then therefore shared with all other people. So nowadays, you go online, you're looking for a book, and 2 minutes later, you get bombarded with 3 other subjects because you bought that book, because that data is being shared. When I send a WhatsApp or an email or I Google something, it kind of worries me that the same people can see every single thing I do. And what I'm saying is it's too much power in too smaller hands.
And I think the point is, I do think it is sinister and it is covert. So people, although you sign up to use a service, you accept their terms and conditions, you accept their cookies, you just do that at a click. We don't know as consumers actually the sinister application of what's being done behind what sits behind that screen. And data is absolutely, as you said, it's so valuable now to companies, because once they have the data, if it's analysed correctly, they can then manipulate the service they give to you, which means that you're being proactively marketed to, or if we go down the sinister route, they can take information that you're providing naively, shall we say. It might be you might have signed up to it, but you won't know the sort of information they're getting, and they can build a profile up of you that may then mean you're not given the opportunity to get the same service as everyone else. So it could be health, it could be insurance, it could be all sorts of things. So you mustn't...
I don't understand. In what way will I not get the same...
Because ultimately, it's sort of moving on. The reason they're buying these companies at a loss, so they've bought LinkedIn at a loss, is because they're not interested in the business. They're interested in getting access to the however many hundreds of millions of
400
people.
Million, yeah.
400 million people.
Yeah.
And the information that those people give willingly and ignorantly to them, they can then sell that on to hundreds and hundreds of different companies, and it can be used. Of course, it can be used in a sinister way.
There's 2 levels of sinister. Sorry, Michelle, go on. You go first.
To me, this is the world that we now live in. So if you think about how things used to be, you'd be on maybe one mail list somewhere, and you might get sold to someone else, or the post office might have your details, or whatever. We are now in a world of big data and big technology firms. And in some ways it's concerning. So in some ways I absolutely echo your point, and I think that there's a huge dominance, not just of the companies, but of the investors that sit behind them, and the media as well that's kind of in there and involved within it. But also I think that there's some positives involved with these big data companies, because big tech companies, because what they've managed to create is whole ecosystems where there are so many entrepreneurs now able to create businesses. So if I think of, you've got people like Amazon, for example, is a huge shopping company. So many smaller businesses now use their, I'm trying to think of how to put this most simply, but they would use their platform, the Amazon platform, if you like, to actually have an online shop. Yeah. You will have, I've lost count of how many businesses will use Facebook Connect to actually get the consumers onto their platform. So these companies
Michelle,
have spawned a whole industry.
That's a great
well.
idea. I endorse, Facebook. I love Amazon. I understand that point. That's not really the issue that I'm talking about. All I'm saying is, when you have too much power, too much control, and too fewer hands, is that good for society? And when I was looking at this, and I then looked at Monopolies Commission, I thought, I like the concept of making sure that nobody gets too much power. Because imagine if there was only one bank. Yeah. The rates are... You could run riot with rates and fees and charges, and that's why these companies get so big. And now, I agree with Emma that, how do you legislate, or do you create this global platform?
Very difficult, very difficult.
It just, for me, just let me give you some financials just to illustrate the point.
Please do. I love a good financial.
LinkedIn loses $180 million a year. And Microsoft paid $26 billion. So even if that company went from making $180 million loss to making $180 million profit, which is a huge swing, it would take 140 years for Microsoft to get their money back.
Yeah. But doesn't that prove the point that the data is the
it's
currency?
So powerful.
And that goes back to my point, is basically the way we use the internet. We're inviting people into our homes to have a good look around, see what we buy, see what we've got in our fridge, see all these different things. Yeah. And I think we should be made aware of that, not just take it for granted that people will accept it.
Graham, I have to bring the world of online to the end of the line. It's my debate next. Another innocent man accused. Another national disgrace. He's one of our best-known and best-loved entertainers over the last 6 decades. Yet the legal system we currently allow to be in place has treated Sir Cliff Richard in a worse fashion than if he were the lowliest of criminals. For the best part of 2 years, this man has been forced to exist in a kind of twilight world, accused of the most vile form of sex crimes, but with no actual charges brought. While it took the incompetent, bungling, so-called police force of South Yorkshire 22 months to investigate this spurious pack of lies and fantasy, it took the Crown Prosecution Service a little over a month to dismiss it entirely. This cannot be allowed to continue. Prosecutors will say identifying those charged with such sex crimes helps bring others forward. But for every Stuart Hall, you have an innocent Paul Gambaccini, Lord Bramall and Jimmy Tarbuck. And for every Gary Glitter, you have a Jim Davidson, Neil Fox and Sir Cliff. How many more lives have to be destroyed before the system is reviewed?
I think one of the important parts of this story that you miss is the media involvement, because they hung him out to dry as well. It wasn't just the South Yorkshire Police.
Well, the BBC.
It was the way, in this case, the BBC jumped on the story. But I've seen it time and time again with
colluded on the story.
Right, colluded on the story, and I don't necessarily know that we've got to the bottom of that, of how that happened. How they got? Did they get a lead?
Yes.
Did they?
And it's worth saying that an independent police inquiry described the actions as highly inappropriate. So that's an independent force investigated the South Yorkshire force, and I think, and I can say this because I've had decades in this business, the whole Sir Cliff Richard episode was a very dark day for the legal system. And it was a very dark day for journalism, and I think it is wholly wrong that the BBC have still not been able to say they're sorry. And that mealy-mouthed pile of cobblers they put out as some form of statement last week, it was in the public interest. In the public interest to investigate uncorroborated claims about a bloke. That doesn't interest me.
But
that doesn't interest
Nick,
me.
in the context of our society and how our media works, they are perfectly entitled to say it was in the public interest.
Yes, that's why I'm saying...
Because everybody has that low standard.
But that's why I'm saying the law has to be changed.
Exactly, but also, journalists, of course we want them to report on stories, of course we want them to get their facts right all the time, but of course they have to speculate sometimes as well. But you have to do that in a way that actually protects the person accused as well as protects the person bringing the charge.
But Graham, how was any protection offered to Sir Cliff, an innocent man who, for thick-ended 2 years, and I don't know if you saw the interview with Gloria Hunniford, and I don't blame him, he was thinking of taking his life.
Yeah, no, I think it's disgraceful. Don't get me wrong, it's absolutely disgraceful.
Go on.
If it wasn't Sir Cliff Richard, so when I looked at the evidence, and the evidence was appalling, would they have done what they did if it was somebody who was not AT or personality?
It's like a regular Joe.
I fear at the moment, in the post-Jimmy Savile guilt, that so many police forces and other agencies had an opportunity to move on that vile pervert, and none of them did. There is this rush. I think, to illustrate the worst moment, was the police standing outside the home of the late Sir Edward Heath, Ted Heath, the former Prime Minister, effectively asking people to come forward, if you've got any information. That is not how policing works. If someone makes a claim that I touched them inappropriately in a radio studio, the police should not instantly arrest me. They should make some inquiries and see if there's anything else, talk to other people in that radio studio and find out. We cannot just have people, high-profile people, being nicked, because if we don't stop this, thank the Lord that everybody that I've mentioned, Jim Davidson, Jimmy Tarbuck, Sir Cliff, has had a network of friends, family, whatever it might be. Someone's going to take their life.
Yeah, but Nick,
someone's going to take their life.
The point is, if your scenario, if we stick with your scenario, if that was then, if somebody went up to another journalist for a competitor radio station and said, "Oh, have you heard about?" Someone would run that story without even having any evidence.
No, you can't. You can't.
But they wouldn't take them long to run the story, and then it's the court of public opinion.
But Graham, you only identify when someone is charged. So the CPS, Crown Prosecution Service, looks at it all. Nick Ferrari, oh yes, he's touched a number of women inappropriately, we'll bring charges.
But how do you get to that point then? So if it's done anonymously, and what you just said is that we'll share the details once there's been a charge. You can only have a charge once you've got enough evidence. Yes. So in order to get that evidence, you have to get access to people that have been potential victims. You have to go fishing, effectively.
You just have to keep throwing names out there. James Caan did this, and Graham was... Just keep throwing the names, and then one day somebody... You can't police and prosecute like that.
just trying to... No, so I agree with you, by the way, that I agree with you... No, so I agree with you that what they're doing is wrong, and it's massively out of proportion in terms of when these people are innocent, when I see the apology that these people get versus the actual...
Disgusting.
The apology is so small versus the damage done. But I'm also trying to look at the other side of it, and I'm trying to think, so if you have got a situation where someone has done something terrible, how do you get that to a point, if it is anonymous, where you can get enough evidence?
Michelle, old-style policing.
Old-style policing didn't catch Jimmy Savile.
No.
Right?
I agree.
Old-style policing didn't catch Clement Freud.
No,
Can you just bring up Clement Freud?
Okay.
No, hang on.
So how many names are we going to put out there?
I literally said a sentence and you won't let me finish it. Let me finish it.
Let's hope it gets better.
Clement Freud, this week, has been accused, in the last week, of raping and being a paedophile with several women. What's very striking about this, a man who has died, must be horrendous for his family to be finding this out, is for his wife to have turned round, who's still alive, and done an apology. That's what's been the most different about this. Usually, there's not that sort of kind of claim, almost. And the reason I bring that up is because a man, very public, who was in radio studios every week, managed to live a great life and die, while his victims, who I've seen on television this week, have said, I could never have come forward, no one would have believed me. Yeah. So there is an issue around historic, because you are talking a lot of the time at the moment as well, what's difficult is historic sex abuse cases. There is a huge issue around people still being believed, and that's what I don't want to get lost in this. I think the way Cliff Richard has been treated is horrendous by the media, by the police...
Sorry, by the BBC.
Right? But I mean, and I do have the BBC statement. You said they hadn't apologised. The one thing I would say is they've said they're sorry he suffered distress.
Oh, so they're not sorry for their actions.
This is I'm just reminding people what they've said.
They're not sorry for their actions.
And they said they were
just...
at all times reported... I'm just saying what it was, reported Sir Cliff's full denial of the allegations.
In the public injury, yeah, right.
But what I'm trying to say is, while I agree with you that I think people should be anonymous until there is all that evidence and they can be charged...
Good. So you're on my side.
I do agree with you on that. Where it starts to get difficult is, and this is a figure, I think I've said this to you once before on this programme, 85,000 women raped last year. That works out, rape crisis figures, as 11 rapes an hour.
OK,
the conviction rate, all of that is nowhere near what it should be.
How does naming innocent celebrities solve that statistic?
No. What I'm trying to say to you is the atmosphere surrounding powerful people, and they don't actually have to be famous. A lot of the time, men in your life, or in lesser cases, women, seem powerful to you, means that people don't feel they will be believed by the police and will go forward. That has started to change in light of what happened with Savile. That has.
But I just want to understand, just a quick question. I want to go back to your point, Michelle. So the definition of charging, because I do agree, and I read the Cliff Richard interview, and he's thinking about changing the law, and I definitely think that it should be changed, and I fully agree with you. The question is, if you can actually... So the law follows 3 stages. You have allegation, charge and conviction. Now, was Sir Cliff Richard actually charged of those allegations?
Not a single charge.
So the law, if we could change the law that says that until you have sufficient evidence where you can actually charge somebody, then you can go public.
So then how do we get that evidence in private?
Hang on, so my point is, so up until the point where you don't have the evidence and you can charge somebody...
But Michelle's question's key. Yeah. How do you get that evidence?
By the way, I agree with all of what you're saying, but how do we get the evidence to get us to that point of charge in private?
OK, but I think you can, but the question is... So hold on, so I'm the police, I'm investigating, and I should, as a police officer, be bound by confidentiality, and the person that I'm talking to should be bound by confidentiality. So, for example,
But you have to know that the investigation is happening in the first place. Sometimes, as a woman in these positions we've seen, with Clement Freud, 2 women came forward, and then another woman has come forward now. Yes. She had to know in the first instance
that other people
were prepared to back.
And that's my key point, because I agree. I'm not disagreeing with anyone, so I agree with you that this shouldn't be happening. People's lives should not be put through the ringer. But in the event where you've got someone that has potentially serially abused women, I just don't see how we get to that point of charge in private.
I'm afraid I don't get it still. I have to police this debate, and it's case closed for now. Whatever the result of the EU referendum, there have been plenty of ups and downs. No doubt there are plenty more to come. No one knows that better than Sky's Adam Bolton, who went well beyond the call of duty to illustrate that very point. Take a look at this. Well, Graham Le Saux, you know a bit about doing your English national duty. That was above and beyond, wasn't it?
That is well beyond the call of duty. I think, well, fortunately for me, my football career, I think, had a few more ups and downs, but that's just the way I look at it.
And credit to him, ever the pro.
Yeah,
the tie,
exactly.
At the last minute. God bless you, Adam Bolton. That's it from us. Send us a tweet to tell us if we're talking sense or nonsense, or if you've got something you think we should be debating. More Straight Talking next week.
Hi, I'm Greg Dyke. I'll be back on The Pledge next week, and by then, the referendum will be over, but hopefully England will still be in the Euros.
I am looking forward to being back on next week's show, but oh my goodness, I'm looking forward to this referendum being over. Michelle Mone, you are in trouble, as are you, Greg Dyke. See you next week.
Provocative. Straight talking. Fairness. Provocative. Straight talking.